Hello, I'm Tara Ruckman.
And I'm Stephanie Howe, and we are Control the Chaos EDU. Are you burnout? Are you feeling frustrated or overwhelmed?
Or maybe it's the opposite and you're a go-getter and want to level up. Then it's time to dive in with real talk and solution-focused conversations.
Welcome to today's Control the Chaos conversation, where we are not going to be talking about snow days, but we did behind the scenes and how missed some of those are because in our district we moved to virtual days. So our kids technically don't have any snow days, but it was just a fun conversation. And that's what I think you're going to learn about our two guests today is they're fun and they're random, or one of them's really random. I feel like the other one's pretty consistent. But we met them at the Teach Better conference. And I know we've talked about the Teach Better conference on this podcast before. So if you've listened in, you've heard us talk about these two guests. And you've also heard how amazing that conference was. Again, we're talking weeks later, months later after that conference, and how much of an impact that conference made. And so our guests today, we started off as friends and we ended as family, is what I've been told. And with that, I knew Patrick, I feel like, since 2020, I think, virtually. And so we finally got to meet at the Teach Better conference. And Patrick is like the hardest working person I know. He's so creative and he is willing to go over and above. And so immediately at the dinner, I was like, oh my gosh, it's Patrick. Like, we finally get to meet in person. But then this other guy just kind of took over and took over the moment because Patrick's more of that introvert where this other guy is not. And so Phil was also there. And so then my life became full getting to know Phil. We learned that we were not following each other, I think, on social media, which I don't know how, with the connection of Patrick. And then I think he asked me, like, I was like, you have a familiar face? I don't even know what happened. But Phil and Patrick, welcome to the show and continue the story.
Hey, we're thrilled to be here, or at least I know I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm going to speak for Pat, but loved getting to meet both of you at the conference and chat with you. And Stephanie, I think that you have referred to us as family more than Pat and I have. Just want to throw that out there to the listeners.
I think maybe I was actually even the one that said that, because I was like, we started as friends and now we're becoming family as we break bread over lunch. So that might be me. I felt like, 2 days, that many hours together. I think I did see you more than I see some of my family in a year. Really. I mean, some of my far away ones. And we had great conversation. I mean, some of the things learning from you guys was awesome. And I got to attend your session and I was like, we have to have them in the show. We have to talk about some of these things that they're talking about in their presentation today. So how about you start off by kind of sharing some of the things that you were presenting at the Teach Better that caught our eye?
Sure. And I guess I can jump in there a little bit too. And I would say the family feel was definitely there. And as we jump into what we were talking about, one of the things that set the conference apart for me was in the sessions, you didn't necessarily walk in and have 100 people in the room. You had 12, maybe 20 at the most. And it was a fairly close-knit group where you could actually feel comfortable asking questions and things like that. And then outside of that, in the networking pieces where you actually really got to know people, being back in person was great to have those off the side conversations, things along those lines. And full credit to Phil as we delve into the presentation here on the title. One of our presentations, our co-presentation, was Not Your Mama's Dioramas. And other than being catchy and making us smile, which is something we always love to get into with humor, it was at its base, it was really about getting real world connections for students in their work and building a project and letting them delve into things that builds up some of those soft skills and things they're going to need to know, not only to thrive in school, but then as they get out of school, they get into the workforce, they go on to college, military, whatever their path might be. skills they can build now, utilize now, that are going to carry them forward and help them out.
And I think one of the pieces to that, just to add on to what Pat has said too, or at least one of the reasons why we did the presentation that we did, was I know I've served on 21st century skills committees before. We've talked about 21st century skills ad nauseum on Twitter and other social media sites. At some point, we have to realize we're like a quarter of the way through the 21st century. We can't keep acting like it's something in the future. It is here and now. So what are we doing to prepare our students for both the here and now, but also as the 21st century continues, what else can we do to make sure they are maximizing their potential as well?
So, like you did some keywords there, soft skills. Tell us what that means for our listeners that haven't heard that before.
So in Virginia, and I'm sure across the country, a lot of us have probably heard about the 4 C's, where we're getting into things like creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication. And I think those are all vital, and those are some of those soft skills. But then you're going to dive into things that maybe go a little deeper, could be connected to those, and get into things like organization, time management, emotional intelligence, different skills that allow you to not only work and kind of function in your own space, but then outside of that, work and function with others, to not only kind of keep things going and keep kind of the status quo, which I know is an evil word in education, but be able to stay in that space, but then also be able to push past that and be able to manage your time to learn new things and be curious and keep those kind of things going forward, so that learning doesn't stop in one spot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Go ahead, Stephanie. Sorry.
and Phil, I mean, you guys killed us with the research, right? When the presentation started, I feel like most people just kind of like quickly go over the why, but like, and then they start sharing different things, or at least I do. But no, you guys like were like, here is some statistics about why these soft skills matter. And I love that you guys did that, because it just like reminded me again that these skills are important for our students. And one thing that I believe it was Phil that said this during the presentation is you actually focus more on soft skills than your curriculum. And
Yeah, I mean, that's a major part of it, right?
uh-huh.
That's a major part of it. Yeah, like our content is the vessel that we use to teach these soft skills, because at the end of the day, like, yes, I want my students to know the significance of the age of exploration. I want them to know about the colonial regions, and I want to be able to show them about how our Constitution was put together. But at the end of the day, in like 20 to 30 years, that might not be something that they're going to keep in the back of their mind, or that might not be something that is essential to their job per se. But those critical thinking skills that we're teaching on the way, the ability to teach them how to communicate and collaborate, those things are pretty essential regardless of your career choice, and regardless of whether or not you're going to be like a contestant on Jeopardy and you know every date for all of the acts that the British Parliament passes against the colonies. You know, we want our students to be prepared for their futures. I think it was Eric Scheninger was the guy that I first heard it from, and then my former principal Evan Robb said it. You know, we want to prepare our students for their futures, not our pasts. So how can we equip them with the skills in our own classes to get them ready for that?
So tell us about some of that research.
I mean, I think some of the big research that we were pulling out was about, you know, trying to figure out, what do our students want to be whenever they grow up. It's very different than what we wanted to be growing up. You know, I never would have thought about being a YouTuber or a social media influencer whenever I was a sixth grader in 2004 or 5. But as I was growing up, and as other kids behind me started growing up, a lot of them started to become more and more interested in that stuff. And teachers would always say, yeah, but like, what do you actually want to do whenever you get older? Like, that's not going to be a career that can sustain you. But Pat, I mean, like we've looked at the data, YouTubers and TikTokers, they're doing really well off, aren't they?
Yeah, and obviously we've all heard about influencers and what that role is like, and the millions and hundreds of millions of followers and things that you may have. But we also looked a little bit deeper and looked at like how much you might get per post if you have 10,000 followers or something like that. And it's a few $100s or so, and into the thousands in some cases. But if you were getting a few $100s every time you posted an image or something like that at 10,000 followers, and I know at least a couple people on this call have 10,000 followers on Twitter and may have on other platforms too. So it's something that full-time professionals, students can get to a level where legitimate income is coming in. And some of those skills that we also talked about outside of, and obviously they fit creativity and things like that, but how do you design graphics? How do you design images and videos and things that people actually are going to stop and look at and not scroll past? How do you bring in some of those design elements and be able to post something that flops and then have that kind of drive, that growth mindset, whatever you might want to call it, the push to make that better, to go back to the drawing board and not be set back kind of by a brief failure, drive that forward. And things that we found on like LinkedIn, publishing articles published there, and we also looked at digital skills and things. A lot of those soft skills and things align to where one of the big driving points of our presentation also was not only these soft skills, and obviously you want to connect your content and make sure that things work well, but you also want to have some sort of a real world connection that the students can build. So they're not just learning about in a book, regurgitating dates back, but are they going to build a website? How are they going to do a podcast? What are they going to do that is something that can actually touch the real world, bring that connection into the classroom?
Or how can they use their study of your content area and again develop those skills to be able to then translate it to the present? Like, I've learned this concept in history, how can I in modern day apply that skill here? I've learned about like this subject in English, how can I take it and in like this upcoming presentation or in this email I have to send my boss, apply what I've learned there. I've learned about, this formula in math, which like maybe I don't need to use the Pythagorean theorem here, but how can I take being able to break down different variables and use that in whatever modern day, maybe engineering profession or other job that I'm doing. Not every student is going to be an influencer, but every student is going to, you have to use technology in some way. They're going to have to think critically. They're going to have to be able to communicate and in all likelihood collaborate. So that's what we want to be able to build with our students.
Yeah, and one thing that I really like that you shared was the reports versus reviews. So taking a simple book report, which teachers I think are pretty familiar with, and the kids just summarize, they identify the characters, they do the theme, all of those same things. But actually turning it into a review where now there's some critical thinking happening, some of those higher level skills that students need in the real world. They're not just summarizing it now. So I liked how you guys took something that might be familiar to teachers, but then, hey, how can we kind of level it up a little bit?
Yeah, I got that idea from my former principal, Evan Robb, and his mom, Laura Robb, on their podcast. They had talked about it. I'm like, you know what? That's a great point in just taking something that we've already been doing and just modifying it a little bit to make it more relevant, to make it more authentic. A lot of times people think that they just have to reinvent the wheel. No, that's not the case. In a lot of cases, it's just taking what we have and then just making a little tweak here and there to make it more authentic for our students.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to nail home. And kind of second is that nothing that we did, nothing we presented, nothing we tried to kind of push out was something that we wanted people to reinvent everything. We wanted you to kind of think about what little tweak, what little thing could I add? What option could you provide the students to maybe come to you and say like, well, what if I do this? Try and play with their passions, their interests, and get some of those different skills kind of almost naturally to fit.
So tell us about the review a little bit more. Steph kind of summarized what we already know with the book report. If somebody was wanting to do a book review, what would that look like?
I mean, if you've ever read reviews on Amazon or, if you've ever rated a restaurant on Yelp, you know in general what a review is. It's going in and it's identifying some of the things that you like, some of the things you didn't like. So in terms of a book review, it would say, don't just tell me about the characters. Tell me, how did the author use a certain character to display a certain like plot or to advance a certain plot device? Or how did the author's tone sound throughout the book? What was the major theme of this book? And how did the author do at applying that theme throughout the entire narrative? It's taking more than just a simple identification of like, this is the theme, these are the characters, this is the plot, and instead evaluating, how effective was the author in doing this? How effective were the characters in trying to accomplish their goals? What was the style? And being able to break it down more so that it reads similar to like a book review. You're becoming a book critic instead of just kind of throwing up what you can read on what was the website where you
I
could
just
look
keep
up
coming back to Cliff Notes as far
yeah,
as
yeah.
like that summary that you could just get regurgitate. Everybody sounded about the same. The book review really takes it well past that. The calling on the student to come in with some of their own words, some of their own feelings on what that book is like, but then also make it a review that's not necessarily completely only their feelings. You got to cite some of those facts and different things and kind of back up your claim and really use some of that critical thinking to analyze it versus just like Phil said, these are the parts of a book. I'm going to fill in the blanks. I'm going to submit my thing.
Yeah, and while Tara's muted, some of the examples that you went over during the session was just kind of fun, where you did like insta geometry, and then where you were also talking about just different things like that. So can you share some of those projects that you have recreated? I know there was a photo of Phil in a wig, I believe.
Yeah, there's a photo of me in a wig. I'll talk about this one, and then I'll let Pat take it from here. One of the things with talking about the American Revolution and talking about, why did the colonies decide to rebel and why did the British want them to stick around? In past, it's something that lends itself very easily to writing an essay. Now, do I think essays are bad? No, but I think there's other ways for us to assess our students, and the more ways that we can do that, I think it gives us a more holistic view of the students that we're working with. So I instead decided to have my students do a debate about it, and debate I split the class into colonists that were loyal and colonists who were patriots, and I had them engage in debates based off of historical events that happened. And they couldn't just read a fact and say, well, this happened in 1763. They had to be able to explain, why does this matter? They had to go that extra step and think critically about it. So while it doesn't necessarily apply to a job they are doing today, I'm still incorporating those 21st century skills of teaching them to collaborate, teaching them how to communicate, which means not only speaking to speak, but also listening as the other side talks as well. That way you can craft your argument and make it relevant to the points that have been brought up. And yes, Stephanie, I wore a lovely wig. It made me feel great due to my lack of hair up top now, and was rocking the judge's wig, rocking my graduate school robe, so I looked like an old colonial judge. And the students came in; they learned how to communicate back and forth with each other. I said to them, I think our government leaders could learn a lot from how well they were able to disagree with each other and how they were able to show respect to each other throughout.
And I'll jump in and kind of build on that with a couple other examples. Again, connecting to the real world and bringing in some of those skills. The insta geometry, was a connection with a former colleague of both me and Phil's in a math classroom, where often I think that might be the one I hear the most questions as far as, when am I ever going to use this? Like, when is this going to help me in my life? Like, I'm never going to need algebra. I'm never going to need this thing in what I want to do later on. And trying to build those real world connections. Todd Risser, the teacher that we kind of knew at that point and brought this project into kind of existence, called on the students to not only do geometry in the classroom, but try through a Instagram template. And Instagram was a bit bigger than it is now. Now it might flip it towards TikTok or something that might have a little more following behind it, but go out in the real world, find pictures, or even if you don't have the option via your phone, use Google, use a search engine to find images where you see geometry in the real world, and then point out some facts about it. Bring some of those classroom skills to tell us, like, what is that shape? Where is it? Things like that. And students found things, obviously, like street signs, things like that. I think me and Phil, both of our favorites, was somebody actually found a picture of a car door and the shape of the window and brought that in and told us more about it. And then a collaboration, which is actually another project, is a connection to web design and creating there. I'll let Phil take the lead, but it was really cool to not only plan a little bit with Phil, but then have some students come back and talk about not only the impact on class, but outside of class with that project.
Yeah, so I had a unit on the Roaring 20s, which, I'll be honest, I taught them everything they needed to know, but it just felt like kind of like a clunker of a unit. So I went back and thought, what can I do to make this more relevant to my students? How can I make it more authentic? And I was trying to think about, what skills are my students going to need in the future? And so I decided to have them create websites. I told them that the American History Museum was getting ready to unveil a whole new exhibit on the Roaring Twenties, and they wanted to educate the public on the Roaring Twenties before they came. So they had to create websites to teach their visitors about the key events of the Roaring Twenties, the key people, the key ideas. And so they started to get to work on that. I showed them some tutorials that Pat made for them. I gave them just enough to be dangerous, as Shane Lawrence would describe it. And then I kind of set them loose to start working on being able to find relevant information, being able to code in different things or incorporate different pieces. I had one student create a feedback form for their website, which I thought was pretty cool, about like, hey, is this website helpful or useful to you? And then I was fortunate enough to make a connection with a guy out near Chicago who was interested in checking out some of the websites, or at least showing his students some of the websites as well. So in that case, my students also had a very authentic audience of like, hey, kids are going to be looking at this, so we want to make sure it's good. At the end, I had my students fill out a reflection form, and one of the things that one of my students in particular said, and I share this at every session I do this, the student said, I know in the future I'm going to have to design a website, and now I can. The student was 12 years old. Imagine what she'll do at 24, at 36, 48, and so on. It's pretty awesome to see them realize how the assignments you give them relates to themselves and how authentic it is for them.
That's pretty amazing, because I think at 12 years old, I was taking a typing class trying to figure out where my hands went on the keyboard. And
Same.
now we have kids at 12 years old that are creating websites. That is real world, right? That's the world we live in now. So that is completely preparing the kids for what's to come. I love it so much. They're going to pass me for sure. I know it.
Me too.
So do you think that, that bit where you shared about the Chicago, did that motivate kids more to like do better work, knowing that others were going to be a part of it, even if they were in the distance?
I think so, because they didn't feel like their work was being done in a vacuum and the audience was just me. They instead realized, there's going to be people that are looking for this. And I told them in some cases, I think the plan was, and it's been years since I've done this, so I'm kind of a little bit fuzzy on some of the details. I think he was going to use it to help some of his students out. And so they knew people were counting on them. And so they wanted to do a good job.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there too and just second the fact that throughout that project and through other collaborations over about 10 years or better now of doing tech integration, and any time that we've been able to extend that audience outside of the classroom, and in some cases extend that audience past just the teacher, the motivation of the students always seems to pick up. And I don't know if I've had a case where it hasn't picked up, as far as wanting to make sure they do a little bit better job, maybe kick it up a notch. And some of the times where that's been really impactful is when it then maybe gets shared to the whole school, or even outside of the school, in Phil's case, where they get an audience and feedback they maybe haven't ever had before. And a lot of times time hits us in this one, but when they can have kind of a collaboration and a feedback loop throughout the project, and then at the end as well, that even ratchets it up another notch, where they're getting collaboration, they're getting feedback, they're thinking critically with people they don't always surround themselves with. And it can really push that work outside of its normal range, and also get some ideas and different things to those students, especially in the case of when Phil did this, he was in a bit more rural space than obviously probably out towards Chicago, Illinois, where those students were kind of collaborating, looking for that resource. So some of those connections also get our rural students out into the world a little bit more. And again, just a completely different audience, completely different way to look at things. And that feedback, not only as students, but as adults, is hugely valuable. I think we can all speak to connections we've made online through Twitter. Hopefully Twitter doesn't go away anytime soon, but who knows in its current state. But those connections and having that feedback has made me better almost every day as a professional.
Building our PLN, right?
Building our PLN, talk about tricolor chips, and making sure Stephanie remembers my name, simple things.
Uh, you led us down a wrong path.
I still I'm devastated by the lack of quality assurance on my end. Just
I'm
disgrace.
still mad about those tri-blend chips. I mean, it was even advertised on the menu.
I know. They had them last time. I'm like, well, I would say I'm totally positive now, but now I'm like, did I just misremember it? Who knows? Maybe.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, if you ever come down to Virginia, we'll find a place for tricolored chips and we'll make sure you get them.
Sounds wonderful.
There you go.
So in all of this, all of these things that you're doing, and you're sharing with teachers, you're sharing with kids, what kind of roadblocks have you had?
I think a lot of them, or at least one of the more common roadblocks that we've run into, and Pat, you can let me know if I'm on the right course here, is that for a lot of students, they aren't used to this kind of work. You know, they're more used to a lot of the stuff that we grew up with, a lot of the like essays, a lot of the like read this chapter, answer these questions, take a test, boom, move on. This is pushing them out of their comfort zone. And in a lot of cases, they're going to try something and they're going to fail. And that's something that we all do as adults. But as adults, a lot of times we can go back and we can make those corrections. We can fix our mistakes, move and grow from it. Students, at least the students that I've interacted with on these sort of projects, they haven't reached that point yet where they realize, oh, you know what, like it's okay for me to try something, fail, and go back and make revisions and improve on it. And so a lot of times, one of the big roadblocks is just students that want to play it safe instead of taking the risk because they think, oh, like this is all I need to do. Whenever what we're trying to do is push them outside of their comfort zone and help them see, like, no, like it's okay to fail at this, and here's how we're going to take that failure and move it forward into a future win and be able to succeed ultimately here.
Yeah, I would agree 100% that especially because a lot of these things that we've talked about have had different elements of choice and allowing the students to kind of choose a path. There wasn't necessarily a set, make this many pages on your website, do this many things, have this many words. And a lot of our students, as they come up through, they're very much used to, this is my exact path to an A. And when you get hit with a number of choices, then sometimes we've had students in different projects that are almost paralyzed by the choice because they're not used to having multiple paths and being able to choose which thing they're going to do to get to that. So we've built in scaffolds, we've kind of helped them out and really nailing home that fact that things don't have to be perfect like instantly. Take some time to work through it, learn from those failures as growth moments, and just make it better the next time. Make it better, show it to some other people, get some feedback in the class, things like that. Work on those collaboration skills, think critically about what you might include. And I would say I'll add one more thing that I think has been a major roadblock, and I think everybody on this call can agree it's probably the thing we absolutely all desperately would like to find more of, and that's time. Anywhere you think about making a change or adding just a little bit something else to a project or tweaking it some way, that question comes in of, is this going to take longer for me to explain? Am I going to lose content? Am I going to fall behind on my pacing guide? Is it going to take longer for the students to do this project than it would have to just give them a test? And I think we have to think about obviously being very cautious about our time, very conscious of it. But the other side is we also need to think about what that kind of very, very pinpointed focus on time might do as far as hurting possibilities of what students can get to, what they can attain, the feedback they might be able to get to grow more. And in some cases, projects do take longer. But I would say on the other side of that, if it's well planned and it's not something that's completely foreign to the students, technology is integrated versus just used once in a while, things like that, it's not necessarily more time, because as students get familiar, they use the tools more, they use the concepts more. It's just part of every day and it flows a lot better. But you have to make that conscious effort and stick to it, because once you just do it once in a while, nobody's going to remember that. It's that out of sight, out of mind type of thing where if you don't use it, you lose it. We got to keep it in front of kids. We got to stick to it to let them build those reps and get comfortable.
Sounds like you guys got it all figured out.
No.
But that's the other thing too. Like as we ask our students to be comfortable with changing things, tweaking things, rolling with it, me and Phil are right there every day doing the same thing. The first class that went through the website thing, it was not pretty. We tweaked it. Second class got a little better. As we kept going, it just kept getting better. And we were very much in front with the students, like, hey, that bombed. We're going to pull that back. We're going to do this thing. And I think being human is another one of those soft skills that we need to be a little bit more out there with, as far as adults fail too. I don't know a teacher that's perfect really any day. And I think that's one of the things we try and put out there for the students. Like, this is how it is. It's my perfect, neat classroom every day. I think being honest and open and empathetic has probably gained me the most ground with every teacher and student I've worked with through the years.
I love it. You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Any last tidbits and takeaways to share with our audience before we wind it up today?
No, but thanks so much for having us on. I mean, Stephanie, Tara, you were awesome interacting with you and chit-chatting with you at the conference. I'm sorry that Stephanie couldn't show her face here today to, talk, but it's probably because of the tricolor chips fiasco. Hopefully you can forgive me and Akron next year, and we can move on with our family relationship from there on out.
It is. You missed so many smiling moments.
And I'll just chuck in there that I love being here. I love being at the conference, and let's keep the learning going. I hope that, as I said before, and I joke about it, but I hope Twitter continues. If not, a lot of us will be out there in one way, shape, or form. Connect with us, find us out there. Let's make some of that collaboration happen and model it with our students too.
So I love it so much. We will definitely continue to connect. We actually recorded with Eric, and we said that maybe we should plan a virtual meetup every now and again, so we can all get together. So we would love to do that. But just wanted to say, visit our show notes today. Your call of action is to follow Phil and Pat on Twitter and check out the things that they share. We will have their Twitters in the show notes. But until next time, control the chaos.
Thanks for listening to Control the Chaos EDU. Check out the description for show notes.
We look forward to connecting with you on social media. Subscribe to the weekly podcast so you never miss an episode. Control the chaos. Until next time.